January 1944, London. Inside Allied headquarters, British Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery believed he had finally solved the Patton problem. George S. Patton, brilliant, volatile, dangerous, had been sidelined after Sicily. To Montgomery, the American general was finished as a serious rival. The future of the war in Europe, Monty believed, would now unfold according to British planning, British timing, and British command culture. He was wrong. Within 12 months, Patton would ruin Montgomery's operational timelines, embarrass British command in front of Allied leadership, cross rivers Monty hadn't even finished planning to cross, and leave behind a statistical combat record Montgomery could not match. This was not an Axis versus Allies story. It was a rivalry inside the winning team, one that shaped Allied strategy from Sicily to Germany. And it began with one assumption Montgomery never questioned: that George S. Patton would accept a supporting role.
By late 1943, Bernard Montgomery was the most celebrated British general of the war. He had defeated Rommel at El Alamein, rebuilt the Eighth Army, and become Britain's symbol of methodical, disciplined warfare. Montgomery believed wars were won by planning, preparation, and control, not speed, risk, or personality. Patton represented everything Monty distrusted. To him, Patton was loud, undisciplined, politically dangerous, and dependent on British experience. Montgomery assumed American generals, especially Patton, would ultimately defer to British leadership in Europe. The U.S. Army was still new to large-scale continental warfare. Britain, Monty believed, had already paid that price in blood. Even after Sicily, Montgomery concluded Patton's success had been accidental, enabled by geography, logistics, and luck. What Montgomery never expected was that Patton had already drawn his own conclusions, and they were very different.
Montgomery's plan for Sicily was clear. The British Eighth Army would drive north and east toward Messina. The American Seventh Army, under Patton, would protect the British flank. Monty believed Patton had one job: support. But the terrain disrupted everything. Montgomery's advance stalled almost immediately in eastern Sicily. The Germans fought hard in the mountains, and the British axis of advance narrowed to a single road. Patton's route vanished. With no flank left to protect, Patton faced a choice: sit idle and wait for orders, or maneuver his army where it could still fight. He chose movement. Patton drove west toward Palermo, the only operational path left to him. Not as defiance, not as ego, but because there was no other road available. Montgomery did not see it that way. To him, Patton had broken the script.
Palermo fell to Patton on July 22, 1943. The capture gave the Americans a major port, disrupted German logistics, and, most importantly, freed Patton to turn east. Only then did Montgomery realize what had happened. Sicily advanced rapidly along the northern coast. On August 17, 1943, American troops entered Messina. The British arrived hours later. Patton's message to Bradley was brief: "It was a horse race, Monty. We won." For Montgomery, this was more than embarrassment. It shattered a belief that American generals would always accept British direction. Patton hadn't just beaten him to Messina. He had proven something Montgomery never expected: that American speed and aggression could outperform British caution. And this was only the beginning.
After Sicily, Allied command faced a crisis, not military, but political. George S. Patton had struck 2 hospitalized soldiers suffering from combat fatigue. The incidents, reported in August, reached General Dwight D. Eisenhower within weeks. In an Allied coalition already strained by personality clashes, Patton became a liability. Montgomery quietly believed the problem had solved itself. Patton was removed from frontline command. No invasion role, no army, no public visibility. To Montgomery, this confirmed his judgment. Patton's temperament made him unfit for sustained high command. British planning culture had always emphasized discipline and restraint, qualities Monty believed Patton lacked. But Patton wasn't sidelined the way Montgomery assumed. Instead, he was about to become strategically indispensable, without firing a single shot.
Early 1944, Southern England. While Montgomery finalized plans for Operation Overlord, Patton was given a strange new assignment: command of an army that didn't exist. The first U.S. Army Group, FUSOG, was a deception formation created to convince German intelligence that the main Allied invasion would strike Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. To the Germans, Patton was the most dangerous Allied general. Where Patton went, they believed, the main attack would follow. Montgomery did not object to Patton's role, but he underestimated it. German intelligence intercepted fake radio traffic, observed inflatable tanks, and tracked Patton's visible movements. The deception worked. Entire German armored formations remained locked near Calais even after June 6, 1944. Patton had influenced the largest amphibious invasion in history without commanding a single division. Montgomery never expected that the man he thought neutralized would still shape the battlefield.
June 6, 1944. D-Day. Montgomery commanded all Allied ground forces during the Normandy landings. The plan was cautious, deliberate, and heavily weighted toward the British sector. But progress was slow. The bocage terrain favored the defenders. German resistance hardened. Casualties mounted, especially around Caen, where Montgomery had promised a quick breakthrough. Patton watched from England. He chafed at inactivity, but followed orders, an important point often overlooked by history. Despite his reputation, Patton obeyed coalition command. Montgomery, meanwhile, began to face criticism from American commanders frustrated by stalled momentum. The pressure to unleash Patton grew. Montgomery still believed that once unleashed, Patton would need tight control. What he didn't expect was how quickly Patton would break open the front.
August 1, 1944. Patton was activated. The U.S. Third Army went operational during Operation Cobra, following the American breakout from Normandy. What happened next shocked Allied headquarters. Within days, Patton's forces advanced faster than planned, exploited gaps Montgomery hadn't anticipated, forced German units into retreat rather than orderly withdrawal. Patton didn't attack frontally. He maneuvered, using speed, decentralized command, and relentless pressure. Montgomery had planned the war in phases. Patton turned it into a pursuit. The German front collapsed across France. Paris was liberated by August 25th. The tempo of the campaign shifted permanently. Montgomery had not expected Patton to transform Allied strategy simply by moving faster than anyone thought possible. And the rivalry was about to enter its most dangerous phase.
September 1944, Northern France. After the liberation of Paris, Allied momentum collapsed, not because of German resistance, but logistics. The Allied supply system had been designed for a slow advance. Patton's Third Army had outrun its fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. So had Montgomery's forces to the north. But when supplies became scarce, priority mattered. Montgomery argued that resources should be concentrated on a single decisive thrust, his thrust. He proposed a narrow advance through the Netherlands into Germany, bypassing Patton's broader push across France. Patton disagreed. He believed the Germans were close to collapse and that pressure across the entire front would prevent recovery. This was no longer a disagreement over tactics. It was a conflict over how wars are won. Montgomery expected Eisenhower to side with British experience. Instead,
Eisenhower hesitated, and that hesitation changed everything.
September 17, 1944. Operation Market Garden. Montgomery finally received priority and launched the largest airborne operation in history. The plan was bold: seize bridges deep inside the Netherlands, cross the Rhine, and end the war by Christmas. Patton watched with skepticism. Market Garden depended on perfect timing, light German resistance, and a single narrow supply corridor. None of those conditions held. British airborne forces reached Arnhem, but could not hold it. German counterattacks severed the corridor. The operation stalled, then collapsed. Casualties exceeded 17,000 Allied troops. Montgomery publicly claimed partial success. Privately, Allied command understood the truth. The gamble had failed. Patton never said, "I told you so." He didn't need to.
While Market Garden faltered, Patton resumed his advance in the south. His Third Army crossed rivers, captured key terrain, and tied down German forces that might otherwise have reinforced the Netherlands. But supply restrictions returned. Fuel and ammunition were diverted north. Patton's advance slowed, not from enemy resistance, but lack of resources. Montgomery believed concentration was essential. Patton believed the pause allowed the Germans to recover. By October 1944, both men were right and wrong. The Germans were regrouping, and they were about to strike where neither Patton nor Montgomery expected.
December 16, 1944. The Germans launched a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest. Montgomery was surprised. So was Patton. So was Eisenhower. But what happened next defined the rivalry forever. Within 48 hours, Patton pivoted his entire army, nearly 250,000 men, northward in freezing winter conditions. Montgomery had estimated it would take a week. Patton did it in 2 days. By December 26th, Patton's lead elements relieved Bastogne, breaking the German encirclement. Montgomery would later take public credit for stabilizing the northern shoulder of the battle. But among Allied commanders, the verdict was clear. Patton had done what Montgomery never expected. He moved faster than British planning models said was possible. And he did it when the war hung in the balance.
January 7, 1945. Zonhoven, Belgium. Montgomery addressed the international press. The Battle of the Bulge was still unfolding, and Allied morale was fragile. Montgomery spoke carefully at first, describing coordination, unity, and shared success. Then he shifted. He portrayed himself as the architect of the Northern defense, implying that American forces had been disorganized until he arrived to restore order. The reaction was immediate and explosive. American commanders were furious. Eisenhower received formal protests from Bradley, Patton, and others. U.S. newspapers accused Montgomery of minimizing American sacrifice. Montgomery later issued clarifications, but the damage was done. Patton said little in public. Privately, he understood something Montgomery did not. In a coalition war, perception mattered as much as performance. And Montgomery had just lost the narrative.
March 1945, Western Germany. Montgomery prepared Operation Plunder, a massive, carefully staged crossing of the Rhine River. The plan involved airborne drops, artillery barrages, and overwhelming force. It was classic Montgomery, deliberate, methodical, and heavily resourced. Then Patton crossed the Rhine anyway. On March 22, 1945, elements of the U.S. Third Army crossed near Oppenheim, quietly, rapidly, and with minimal casualties. Patton informed Eisenhower after the crossing had begun.
Montgomery was stunned. His operation went ahead days later, successful but overshadowed. The symbolic barrier of Germany had already been broken. Patton had crossed the Rhine without the spectacle, without the build-up, and without waiting. It was something Montgomery had never expected him to do.
As the war entered its final weeks, the contrast between the two commanders became impossible to ignore. Patton's Third Army advanced farther, captured more territory, took more prisoners, and did so in less time. Montgomery's forces fought effectively, but slowly. His preference for overwhelming preparation reduced risk, but limited tempo. These weren't opinions, they were measurable outcomes. Yet Eisenhower never replaced Montgomery. Why? Because coalition warfare required balance. Montgomery provided caution, Patton provided momentum. Together they worked, often in tension, sometimes in conflict. But Montgomery had expected leadership. What he got was competition.
May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. The war ended without a final reckoning between the two men. Patton was celebrated by American troops and watched cautiously by Allied leadership. Montgomery returned to Britain as a national hero. They never reconciled. After the war, Montgomery wrote extensively, defending his decisions, explaining his caution, and criticizing American recklessness. Patton never wrote his final account. He died in a car accident in December 1945, just months after the war's end. History would decide the rivalry without him, and that decision would not go the way Montgomery expected.
When the war ended, Allied planners quietly reviewed the data. Not memoirs, not press statements, numbers. Patton's Third Army advanced more than 600 miles across Europe in under 10 months. It captured over 1.2 million German prisoners, liberated thousands of towns, and destroyed or captured hundreds of enemy formations. Montgomery's forces fought well, but their advance was slower, more deliberate, and far more resource-intensive. Casualty ratios, territory gained per day, and operational tempo all told the same story. Patton's methods worked. Montgomery had believed Patton's aggression would lead to collapse or disaster. Instead, it produced results that reshaped modern armored warfare doctrine. This was the first thing Montgomery never expected, that Patton's way of war could be measured and proven effective.
In the years after the war, Montgomery wrote often and defensively. He emphasized planning, coalition balance, and restraint. He warned against glorifying speed at the expense of control. Patton became something else entirely. American military academies studied his campaigns. His emphasis on tempo, initiative, and decentralized command influenced post-war doctrine from Korea to the Cold War. Montgomery remained respected. Patton became legendary. This was the second thing Montgomery never expected, that history would remember the American as the innovator and the Briton as the conservative.
Both men had enormous egos. That part of the story is true. But the difference wasn't pride, it was risk tolerance. Montgomery believed mistakes killed armies. Patton believed hesitation did. Montgomery expected Patton's personality to destroy his effectiveness. Instead, Patton learned, painfully, to operate within limits while still pushing boundaries. This was the third thing Montgomery never expected, that Patton would mature without slowing down.
By the end of the war, Montgomery had been proven wrong in ways that were impossible to ignore. He never expected Patton to outmaneuver him in Sicily, beat him to Messina, influence D-Day without commanding troops,
break out of Normandy faster than planned, force Germany into full retreat across France, recover from political disgrace, pivot an entire army in 48 hours, relieve Bastogne ahead of schedule, cross the Rhine first, win the statistical comparison, shape post-war doctrine, be vindicated by history. None of this had been inevitable. All of it happened.
In the end, neither man won the rivalry outright, but together they won the war. Montgomery's caution prevented catastrophe. Patton's aggression prevented stagnation. Montgomery expected control. Patton delivered momentum. The greatest rivalry of World War II was not between enemies, but between allies who pushed each other beyond what either believed possible. And that tension, uncomfortable, personal, and relentless, helped carry the Allied armies all the way to Berlin. History didn't choose sides. It told the truth.